Story 1. I was hit by a car as a pedestrian and broke my leg, pelvis, part of my back, shoulder, jaw, and fractured my skull. I was sedated for 3 weeks until they could complete all surgeries and woke up with a feeding tube in my stomach and a tracheostomy to help me breathe. Overall, I spent a month and a half in the hospital and am still in physical therapy for the injuries. Story 2. Having a lung removed, the back and side muscles being cut, the rib cage being split apart, then the pleural cavity filling with fluid, organs stretching out and moving around to fill the space. It was a weird month. Story 3. Didn't get my period and experienced a ton of abdominal pain. I ended up finding out that the blood was collecting in my uterus, around 1 to 2 liters. It was the worst pain ever. Story 4. A kid fell into a river where we were camping by accident, and I went in after him. The water was only about 2 or 3 feet deep, waist high, but the flow was strong, and the water was ice cold. I had a moment where I thought I might endanger us both as I was struggling to hold him. His 70 pounds felt like a lead weight as I struggled to get us both out of the water. Others ran to help at the bank. I was not well prepared. I never want to face that situation again. I was the wrong person for the job. I had 2 young sons who might have seen their father die, but I couldn't let the kid drown in front of horrified campers. It was just the worst nightmare. Story 5. Gunshot to zone 2 of the head. Took out my entire jawbone but left my teeth fully intact, even though it passed between my wisdom teeth. The slug ended up against several arteries as shrapnel. I live a normal life now, but I had 6 years of consequences and still experience chronic pain. The weather is a nightmare. I question the reality of life and experience itself daily. Story 6. Got hit by a car as I was riding my bike. Woke up a week later in the hospital with a fractured shoulder, ribs, hip, and a head trauma so bad I could not recognize my parents or girlfriend for the first week. Maybe it was the sedation. I don't know. My leg had a very large wound from the back of the knee down on the calf. It was open like a book. I remember holding it together before the ambulance came to pick me up. Then I blacked out. Left leg injured and right arm injured, so I could not even push my own wheelchair or use crutches. During that time, I woke up 2 times during surgery. First, during the shoulder surgery, I started telling the anesthetist that I had used drugs in the past. Then I woke up again during leg surgery. From that time, the anesthesia doctor called me the horse. After about 2 months, they let me go back home, but it didn't end here. The leg got infected. The smell of the putrid meat, I will never forget this. The pain of the 78 stitches in my leg, the broken arm. I was just miserable. I spent 6 months in a wheelchair, and now I am back on both legs walking like before. This has changed me. All the pain, the chance to lose my leg at such a young age, and the joy to overcome pain and get back on my feet made me into the man I am now. I am really grateful to be alive and walking. This life is a gift. Story 7. Broke a leg, but to be more edgy. Being alone for so long, I've had a few points in my life that have been extremely lonely and empty. Pretty much my teenage years and 23 to 28. I was homeschooled, and I spent most of my time alone in my room on the internet. Then I had a huge falling out with a friend group. I'd rather break my legs more. Story 8. An abortion at 18 years old during an abusive relationship. I was already at rock bottom and had to go through it alone. Not to mention experiencing post-abortion depression, which no one ever seems to warn you about. Still not as bad as postpartum depression, but it's real. 10 years later, I still cry every once in a while when I think about it. Story 9. Those are the top 3. 90 kilometers march with full gear. Hell Week, a week of exercises that simulates a real war. 2 hours of sleep a day, eating a can of tuna and a slice of bread a day, and still having to perform effectively. Dysentery and the months it took to fully recover from it. Story 10. My twin brother died suddenly. Our last interaction was an argument. You always see people fall to their knees in movies, and I thought it was just drama. The moment the police officer said, "I think he's dead," I heard the sound of glass shattering and was on my knees. That wasn't painful. Waking up every night remembering he's gone is a pain I hope no one ever has to experience. The only reason I am still here is that I can't put my wife through the pain I feel every day. Story 11. Training months for an Ironman triathlon. Running 13 miles in 90 degrees heat after a 100-mile bike ride. Although they were hard, they were also joyful. Story 12. Pancreatitis. My liver almost shut down. I had to stay in the hospital for a month and could not eat or drink the entire time. The pain was unimaginable. Before I went to the hospital and they figured out what was wrong, I was having attacks for months where I would be on the floor screaming at the top of my lungs. I have a couple of friends who have had it and have also given birth, and both have said they would rather give birth. Story 13. Being a farmhand keeps you pretty banged up. I now have constant pain in my knee, along with other injuries that make it hard to get up in the morning, and I'm not even over 25 yet. Story 14. Being a foster parent for my granddaughter for her first couple of years. Then about a month before she became ours permanently, her father sobered up and got custody. Absolutely heartbreaking. It has been about a year, and my wife and I are still trying to adjust. Story 15. Shattered my shoulder and had 9 screws and a plate permanently installed. That wasn't bad, as my body shut off all pain receptors during the incident and in the days before surgery. By far, the worst pain I have experienced was when the nerve blocker wore off after surgery. That's with me having broken many bones, my back, fractured a small part of my skull, a complete rebuild of my other shoulder, and almost losing a finger to an industrial fan. I play hard and also have Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, so injuries are just a part of my life. Story 16. Nasty heroin and fentanyl withdrawal. Wouldn't wish that pain on my worst enemy. Luckily, I did it in my home and not in a jail cell, because that's the only way many others make it out. I'd say your muscles or joints hurt, but it's more than that. Your bones hurt to their core. It feels like you can't stretch far enough, and your arms and legs are so restless you're flailing around like you're having a seizure, shaking and trembling. Snotty and teary-eyed. Sneezing. Vomiting. You won't sleep for several days, maybe even a week. You won't eat. It's terrible. Story 17. Giving birth, without a doubt, was intense. My labor progressed so quickly that I couldn't get an epidural in time. On top of that, it was back labor, with the baby facing towards my spine instead of my belly button, putting a lot of painful pressure on my back. It was so painful that my screams while pushing were primal. My intravenous line got ripped out of my arm at some point, and it didn't even register. No one noticed it was out until my baby was born. Story 18. 15 years of marijuana addiction and alcohol abuse. The unhealthy food, lack of exercise, and general abandonment of my well-being took its toll. I'm feeling much better after 5 years sober. Story 19. My mom unexpectedly passed away last year from some flu or chest infection at home, 2 days before her 59th birthday and 5 days before my 31st. I still need her. We were close, and it broke me when I was told the ambulance crew were stopping cardiopulmonary resuscitation. I was downstairs at the time, and they couldn't get her downstairs to the ambulance. Story 20. Doing a 2,200 square foot tile job in 3 days when we thought we had 10. Yes, it turned out the hotel bar, lounge, and billiards rooms, they finally told us, were going to be used by our city's 200-person police department for an end-of-year party 4 days after we started demolition. It was brutal. We worked at least 18 hours each of those 3 days and just slept on the floor for 30 minutes at a time when we couldn't do any more. Story 21. I commonly suffer from migraines. As a child in the 1990s and early 2000s, they weren't well known medically, so they were treated as severe headaches. Acetaminophen doesn't work on them. I was diagnosed as a teenager, and after medical studies were done, I got those down to a fine art. For a while, they were the worst pain I ever experienced. As a kid, I did break bones and get some serious injuries doing dumb things. Then, bam, a new style of headache came in. I wanted to actually kill myself, but I couldn't comprehend basic actions. I could only lock up, curl into the bed, maybe shed a tear, and focus on breathing. The pain I cannot even explain. It took 10 years for them to diagnose that one specific headache as a cluster, all because one side of my face looked like I had a stroke, and my mom, helpless, rushed me to the hospital. It happens annually, usually for an hour. I think the longest is 3 hours. Feels like a lifetime. I do not know if this is as bad as I portray it to be, but to me, it's the worst. Story 22. COVID. It wasn't the coughing or headache. I felt so drained that I felt like I was dying. I was up once for 3 days of very physical activity. That was nothing compared to COVID. I don't think English has a word for how drained I felt. I was explaining it to my daughter. She said it wasn't just that my hit points were low, but my maximum hit points had dropped. Story 23. Going through 3 oral surgeries for Copenhagen dip cancer. Had gauze sewn to the inside of my mouth with it attached to the outside of my chin. Lost jawbone and large amounts of tissue. Lost 8 teeth in the process. Now they are trying to insert implants into the remaining jaw. The pain from the beginning is out of Dante's Inferno. If you are using Copenhagen wintergreen, stop while you can. Tony Gwynn did not, and it killed him. I am not done yet. Story 24. Heartbreak, that feeling that sinks within, and no matter what you do, it will always be there. Even when time seems to close the old wounds, when you think about it, it opens a small fissure that reminds you of the pain you once felt. Story 25. Miscarriage at 12 weeks. It was by far not the worst thing anyone has had to endure, but I'm very proud of myself for getting through it. It actually makes me excited to face birth one day and get through that too. Story 26. Breaking back in high school led to an opiate prescription followed by a crippling heroin addiction. It all lasted about 2 years. Went through withdrawals in jail after a drug transaction. 12 years clean this last December. Story 27. Herniated disc in my neck. I had pretty intense pain for a couple of days but shrugged it off as being in my mid-30s. But then I woke up one day and couldn't leave the bed. My neck hurt so badly I just couldn't move. My wife gave me a lift to the doctor later that day, and they confirmed that I had a herniated disc. I was sent home with some instructions for physical therapy and had to see a trainer every 2 weeks for checkups. It took me about a year to get the strength and movement fully back, which was absolutely terrible since I had 2 small kids during this time, and I couldn't lift them or play with them fully. Story 28. Twin pregnancy. By the end, I was swollen to +2, +3 in places, and so low on iron I had to do 3 weeks of iron infusions and still needed a blood transfusion after delivery. Loosened ligaments and tendons in my hips made it nearly impossible to walk right before and after birth. One kneecap tightened back down in the wrong place, and I was in physical therapy for nearly a year to get that and my hip somewhat fixed. Once the swelling and some of the weight came off, I had a huge loose pouch of skin that caused rashes and infections. I had to get it removed and will likely need a revision plus removal around my thighs once I've fully hit my goal size because it's structurally painful when I work out. I love my kids, but I'm so happy to have 2 in one go. I wouldn't be pregnant again for anything. Story 29. Appendicitis. The hospital only diagnosed me 2 days into my stay. I was elated and in continuous pain. I had fever nightmares. The pain was incredible. Story 30. Severely herniated lumbar disc between the 5th lumbar vertebra and the 1st sacral vertebra impinging the sacral nerve root. It was hell on earth for 6 months before my body finally gave up on me, and I could no longer control my bladder and couldn't feel my penis or my left leg. The sciatic nerve pain was worse than anything imaginable. I feel that getting my leg cut off with a chainsaw would have been less painful. It caused my back and leg to spasm constantly. It made getting up or sitting down hellish, which made using the bathroom virtually impossible, and I could not remain in any position very long, or my back would get worse. Walking was the only relief I could get from the pain, but with a bad leg and the nerve pain, it caused back spasms for about the first 30 minutes anyway. I had never experienced passing out from pain before this, and eventually it was happening multiple times per day when trying to stand up. Story 31. Dengue fever, like 15 years ago, breaks out in my country, probably from Sri Lanka. A lot of people lost their lives in the first outbreak. I didn't catch it at that time, though, but the virus stayed, and every year around August and September during the monsoon season, it hits back and claims many lives. In 2022 to 2023, 2 years in a row, I contracted it. High fever, body and joint pain, and a drop in platelet count can kill you pretty fast. It's a really nasty thing to have. It breaks your body beyond repair. I never felt the same after contracting it the second time. Whenever I'm really tired, I feel the same pains in my spine. Story 32. Had emergency cesarean section without being fully anesthetized. Daughter was a 2-pound preemie. Grew up to have 2 beautiful little boys. A happy marriage and a great career. It was worth it. Story 33. Being up for a little over 4 days straight overseas on an operation. Hot as hell, your gear is heavy, lots of dynamic movement. Everything is chaotic and stressful. It was a mess. Story 34. Last year, in August and September, I was betrayed and suffered from anxiety and overthinking. I lost my appetite and dropped 7 to 8 kilograms. It took me 5 years to gain from 48 to 68 kilograms, but I dropped back to 60. Your mental state affects your body badly. If you don't recover from it, it gets worse. Story 35. I got a parasite from water when I was staying somewhere in the jungle of the Philippines. 10 out of 10 pain, blacking out, everything in my stomach, even when nothing was left, coming out both ways. I swear I blacked out at one point and was on the verge of seeing the other side, if you know what I mean.